Hello, Ravens flockers. I'm Tony Lombardi with Russell Street Report. I'm here with Dev Panchwagh, an analyst on Russell Street Report. Dev, how's it going?
Fantastic. It can't get any better. We got draft coming up. We got free agency still going on. So this is about as good as it gets, I think.
I saw the Ravens tweet out today a 1-second clip of Eric DeCosta on the sidelines, like with a fist pump. And it's pretty cool. So I might even have to put it on this video here. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, and he's in the Ravens tweeted out that this is how you feel 2 weeks before the draft.
I think that's appropriate. No, this is that particular clip. Yeah, I think that totally resonates.
Yeah, so I'll put it on there. Anyway, we want to talk about edge rushers today. Justin Houston, he's been in this week to visit with the Ravens. A couple other guys we have on our list. I don't know if they're on the Ravens list, but they would seem to make sense for the Ravens. The other two guys being Melvin Ingram and Ryan Kerrigan. But let's talk about Justin Houston first. And I know we agree on this, that he's our favorite of those three guys to fit into the Wink Martindale system. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a lot to like here. When you talk about a true edge player, a guy that can do some stand up, put his hand down. He's got the experience going back to his Kansas City days. He didn't do that much with Indianapolis. They kept him in that 4-3 scheme. He had his hand down, but he's very productive. Just last 2 seasons, I think he's had 19 sacks. Doesn't have much tread on the tires. It's interesting, Tony, that I was doing some research on him, and Chris Ballard, the GM for the Colts, he compared him to Julius Peppers. He said, this guy going into his 30s, I think he's got that ability to play at a high level and kind of just age gracefully. And that's exactly what he's been doing. And I think the reason he fits really well with the Ravens is twofold. One, he can play the run. So you don't have to worry about kind of like Yannick Ngakoue last year, where you bring him in and then the defense just attacks his side. He can play the run. He sets the edge. Very good. And he can kind of give you a lot of the same components Pernell McPhee does in that regard. And then the second thing is he's been durable. So in comparison to these other players that are still out there, I think Houston has to be their number one choice just based on that alone, I think.
Yeah, he's played in all 16 games the last 2 seasons. And as you pointed out, he's got 19 sacks. He had 11 in 2019 and 8 sacks in 2020. He is 32 years old. All three of these guys, coincidentally, are 32 years of age. Houston, Ingram, and Kerrigan. So the one thing that bothered me about Yannick Ngakoue, and you brought it up, is that he was almost a situational player, at least in Wink's system. And maybe that's because he didn't have a training camp under that and didn't understand assignments and dropping into coverage. But speaking of that, do you think that Justin Houston is a guy that can drop into coverage, much like the way Wink had used Judon in the past?
I don't know if he gives you quite that much of versatility in that same respect in terms of dropping and deep drops, but it was something I was thinking about, and I think it's more applicable to like a Pernell McPhee, where they ask him to do some shallow drops. He still gets involved in coverage, and that's going to be one of the things that they vet, I would imagine, in this visit process. They're going to have to talk to him and figure out, is he okay with that going back to his Chiefs days, when he did have to do more of that, where I feel like with the other players, especially like Ingram, who we're going to talk about, there's no known quantity there as far as his ability to drop into coverage. So he's not going to give you Judon quality coverage ability, but he can give you some, and it makes it so that, and especially more than Yannick. So it gives you, he's a more complete player in that sense. And the other thing I'd throw in there, rotationally, I think he's still best used as a rotation guy. The Colts actually kept his snaps, I think, a little bit less than 60%. But again, the difference is you don't have to necessarily play him only in pass rushing situations.
Right. You don't want to dictate what you're defending by your personnel subgroups.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Yeah. So he's 32 years old. Melvin Ingram, he's a guy that's been productive similarly in his career with the Chargers. But Ingram has been nicked up. He had 5 seasons in a row where he played 16 games. The last 2 seasons he's played, I believe, 13 and then 7 in 2020. Yeah. That's a concern when you're 32 years old.
It's incredible. He'd been an Iron Man, and then just all of a sudden everything caught up to him. So that's the concern with him, is his body. He's a guy that plays like a wrecking ball. So is the body failing him? And the other thing to think about is he didn't have a sack last year. Like, again, just looking at that and then looking at the fact that I know he fought through a lot and there was a lot made about the contract situation too. So is it something you can just chalk up to? It was just a bad year for him. He wasn't in, maybe like he wasn't engaged. The injuries were frustrating as well. And then production wise, it just, all kind of fell apart for him. I think that's one of those things where I'm willing to, give them the benefit of the doubt if they feel like everything else is there. But those are huge red flags.
Yeah, the last guy on the list is Ryan Kerrigan. And coincidentally, all three of these guys, besides being 32 years old, they're also leaders on their football teams.
Yes.
And that's one thing I like that they could bring to the Ravens defense. I know the Ravens are already loaded up with leaders like with Calais Campbell and with Brandon Williams and Chuck Clark, but it never hurts to have another guy who can bring an outside perspective to the locker room. And all three of these guys do that. But Ryan Kerrigan, also 32 years old, he's been very durable, Dev. He's played in 156 out of a possible 160 career games. So that's a thing that you really need with a defender on the edge, is the availability outside of his regular or skills and abilities. But he's had 5.5 sacks over the last 2 seasons, Ryan Kerrigan. Certainly his playing time diminished last year with the front four that the Washington football team has.
You just nailed it. It was interesting because I was the most concerned about him, because it kind of raised an alarm to me, because like Ingram, we can point to and say, okay, yeah, like the production and the durability are concerns, but he can plug into this defense, I think, schematically. But what were the issues in drop in production for Kerrigan? And finally, yeah, that's exactly it. They just limited his snaps. So looking at it, they had him at 24 snaps a game. Really made a conscious effort to keep him fresh. They did have a surplus of talent, so depth was an issue. I know he had voiced that he wanted more playing time last year, so that's one thing to think about. But in the year prior, I think, to your point, was one of the few seasons where he missed a couple games. So his situation is a little bit easier, I think, to determine. He's been used more in a concentrated effort to rush the quarterback, very highly efficient doing that, by the way. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Pro Football Focus had him rated very highly in their efficiency rate. Yeah, so that's a positive too. So I think a lot of things line up with this one, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. I don't know why he's been on the market, other than maybe he just wants that bigger role and teams just aren't willing to necessarily give it to him. But if the Ravens can convince him to stay in that kind of snap count, I think this one looks like a possible good fit for sure.
Yeah, and I think that, consider that he's down there in DC, would have to come up to Baltimore. That's not a big transition.
Yeah,
family. So that's a positive.
People don't like moving, right? So
right.
Yeah,
I don't think any of these guys are going to be signees before May 3rd, and May 3rd being the magical date that you can sign existing free agents to contracts without affecting the comp pick formula.